This is a journey.
Let me take you on a journey.
There will still be
The journey.
New sheriff in town, and his name is
The Journey.
Journey.
This thing is bigger than Nino Brown. This is The Journey.
The journey.
What is it that moved you?
The Journey. The Journey. The Journey. The Journey.
Welcome back to another episode of The Journey. I'm your host, Larry Robinson, and today we're bringing you another Memphis icon. So today we have a gentleman by the name of Williams Brack out of Greenwood, Mississippi, matriculated to Memphis, and now throughout his career and throughout his journey, he is now VP at one of the larger banks in the area. In addition to that, he's been involved in various political campaigns. In addition to that, he plays a lot of roles with different boards all throughout Memphis and the greater Mid-South. So without further ado, introducing Mr. Williams Brack. Hey, how you doing, Brack?
I'm doing pretty good. With that introduction, I'm running down the ramp to the wrestling ring. So thank you.
Well, that's all cool. Good. Well, listen, man, this is a getting to know you round, so you know we're going to get it a little real funky real early and get kind of fast and checking this out. So we're going to get started. Where were you from, and where did you spend your early years? And what do you remember about that community?
So I'm from Greenwood, Mississippi, worldwide known as the Mississippi Delta, which is essentially the cotton capital of the world. And one of the poorest regions in the United States of America.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that stands out to me is the poverty. My folks were sharecroppers, and although we left the plantation and the sharecropping fields, the mentality stayed. And so we grew up, there's the poverty line, there's the low poverty, and then there was my family. So I remember the welfare and the food stamps and the Section 8 and the Christmases where strangers were bringing the gifts to me. And so that was my upbringing, and that poverty is a huge standout for me, and it's extremely meaningful in my life.
Okay, next. Who outside your parents had the biggest impact on your life?
There's really, that's a good question. And the who is really a collective. And that collective was a lot of teachers at my school who recognized my early intelligence and encouraged me to be good at school and to be somebody. And I had no idea who that somebody was going to be, but I did latch on to the encouragement of a lot of the teachers that I had when I was in school.
What decision did you make as a younger person that turned out to be a life-altering decision in hindsight?
I think the decision to actually play sports. Honestly, there's two. As a younger person, let's call it middle school, I decided to play sports. And I decided to play football, and I decided to call myself a quarterback. Now, when I made all those decisions, I watched a little football on TV, but I wasn't an athlete. When I called myself a quarterback, I knew nothing about the position, but I said, this is who I want to be and what I'm going to do. And then I kind of figured out the rest as I went. And that's kind of been an overarching theme of my life, honestly.
So how different are you from the dreams of your childhood?
That's a really good question. And it's hard to answer because unlike a lot of people, I didn't necessarily have dreams of who I wanted to be. What I had, though, was a vision and concrete information in front of me of who I didn't want to be. I saw the poverty. I saw the drugs. I saw the hard times. I saw the people around me, family, friends, and in the community who weren't educated. My mother dropped out in the 9th grade. My grandmother didn't finish the 11th grade. I had many people in my community where middle and high school was the end. And so I didn't have dreams of, hey, I want to be this when I grow up. Mine was, I know I want to be the opposite of what I see every day. And I was going to figure out the rest as I went along.
At that point, when you were figuring it out, at what point did you know you were going to be okay or you were going to be a success?
I think early in middle school, again, talking to the teachers, I took care of business. I did my schoolwork, and I started to get into some small sports, maybe flag football when I was in middle school. But all my teachers told me, you are going to be successful. Just don't have any kids before you finish school. You're going to be successful. So I started hearing this maybe in the 7th and 8th grade. I was the valedictorian in middle school, so I continued to hear it. You're going to be successful. I was on path to be the valedictorian or the salutatorian in high school, and I was a football player. And so all the teachers were like, hey, you're going to be successful. And so in my mind, I was going to be successful. It wasn't an attempt to be it. I just knew I was going to be successful, and figuring out how to define that success was my job.
What's your why, Brack? Why do you get up every day and make, punch the clock, hit the gym? Why?
I think a lot of it is I'm still running from that early version of me, right? Because being a black man in America, I'm one or two decisions from being back there, right? There's no safety in my lifestyle of the day. I do well, life is good, but I'm always one or two or three bad decisions away from being that poor kid below the poverty line in Mississippi. And so I continue to work with that. And then trying to be an example for people to say, hey, no matter where you came from or how hard you had it or whatever decisions you have to make, you can be successful. You don't have to be a product of where you grew up. You can make different decisions. Are those decisions hard? Absolutely. Right. But you definitely can make good decisions and get the life either you envision or the opposite of where you are currently.
Many people that have sat in that chair can remember when they realized they were black. Do you have a story of when you realized you were black?
I think the blackness hit me full force in my first professional job out of college. So I grew up in all black neighborhoods for my entire life. So middle school, high school, and elementary, all black neighborhoods. I went to all black schools my entire life. So elementary, middle, high school, and 2 all black colleges. And so my first time having to face the reckoning of being white is my first job where there was only 3 black people there and everybody else was white. And so trying to be a financial advisor and you're no longer the majority in the environment you're in was the first time I realized I was white. I mean, that I had to face a reckoning of my blackness.
This is The Journey, and we're listening to the journey of Williams Brack. Greenwood, Mississippi, Memphis, Tennessee, black colleges. We're going to have him unpack it all in the next segment. So don't go anywhere. You're listening to or you're viewing The Journey on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
The Journey.
Jazz, America's own original musical art form. When did it start? Who were and are some of the major players? How do you distinguish what kind of jazz you're listening to? We talk about the great and lesser-known artists, songs and tunes, the instruments, and the social impact jazz has had on world culture since its beginning at the start of the 20th century.
Riffin' on jazz on the KUDZUKIAN Network. KUDZUKIAN!
And we're back with The Journey on the KUDZUKIAN Network. And as you can tell, we got another phenomenal Memphis icon, Mr. Williams Brack, VP of Community Development at Regions Bank. So, Brack, tell us about the early years, family structure, back in Greenwood, mother, father, sisters, brothers. Who was in the household?
So let's start off saying I don't know my father. I may have met him when I was in Greenwood around 5 or 6 years old, but I come from a matriarchal family, meaning my grandmother was the head, I had my mom, 2 aunts, and an uncle. And so the household was my grandmother, her boyfriend, my mom. Early on, my aunts and my uncle was also included, but essentially my grandmother, my mom, her boyfriend, and then me. And so, growing up, it's all women. But in a small town like Greenwood, Mississippi, I essentially had free reign over the city.
Right.
I could leave in the morning, play all day, and come back home when it was time for dinner. Or I'd go downtown, I'd sweep floors at the local cobbler, the shoe fixer,
right.
Use that money to buy donuts, or shamefully, I'd go to Fred's and steal toys and stuff that my folks couldn't buy me. Or I'd go to the grocery store and steal candy. Not proud of it, but I did do it. My folks weren't buying it. They just weren't.
Well, I'm looking at the big smile on your face, and it begs me to ask you, tell me about some of those fond memories in Greenwood, Mississippi.
Yeah, so I think growing up, again, I think sports unofficially was a huge part of my life. Like I'd go to the park and I'd play basketball. Wasn't very good, but I'd play. Or we'd have some mattresses out there and we'd be doing backflips on the mattresses in Greenwood and just playing. It was carefree. Like when you're poor and you're a kid, you don't recognize that you're as poor as you are, right? And so you still have fun, you still have a good time, you still connect with people, and you still love your family, right? But even though we had hard times, I still learned how to play spades, learned how to play dominoes, tonks, all these different things that I still use today. And so, I could be upset or angry about the poverty and the way I grew up, or I could be grateful that I did learn the things that I learned in that environment in Greenwood that honestly I still use today.
You talk about poverty and poverty really shaping a lot of your early years. Beyond poverty, what were some of those not so fond memories of your childhood? What is one not so fond memory?
You say beyond poverty. There's no beyond poverty for me. Right, it colors the majority of my childhood, and so a not so fun memory is 1 or 2 nights going to bed hungry, 1 or 2 nights or a few weeks, light, gas, and water being turned off. We had to borrow a big gallon bucket of water from our neighbors just to flush our toilets sometimes, right? And so that's a not fun memory. Or walking around, going to school with clothes that smelled or holes in the bottom of my shoes because we just didn't have it. And so, for me, there's no beyond poverty. It pretty much just colored my entire upbringing.
Tell me about your teen years. Did you move at that point? Did you make that transition to Memphis from Greenwood? Tell us about that transition and how it affected you as a young kid.
Sure. So when I left Greenwood, I went to Chicago. And so like many people from Mississippi, there's I-55 that takes you a straight beeline to the Midwest out of the South. And so me and my mother were no different. We relocated to Chicago for my middle school years. And then my great-grandmother, who had 21 children, she passed away. And so the entire family located across the country kind of descended on Memphis. And descended on Chicago. And while I was there, I had an aunt who had relocated to Memphis, a different aunt who had relocated to Texas. And I asked both to come for the summer. Well, my aunt in Texas got into some trouble. I didn't hear from her. And my aunt from Memphis, I didn't hear from her the entire summer, but she invited me to come live with her. So she called me up on a Sunday in September. The next day, Monday, I was in a Greyhound bus back to Memphis. And she had educated herself, so she had finished high school, gone to Jobs Corps, finished her bachelor's degree. She was married. She had 4 kids of her own, and she was doing well. And so she invited me to come down. My grandmother had relocated from Greenwood, Mississippi, also to Memphis. And so I came to Memphis living with my grandmother while my aunt was some extra support. Mm-hmm. And so different from middle school where I was walking around with holes in my shoes. She would buy me a pair of shoes or some sneakers or some boots as needed. Or if I needed some uniform shirts, she'd pitch in here and there. And so the family started to do a little bit better, led by that particular aunt.
So as you're growing,
Yep.
and you've, I guess, gone on to college at this point, when did you realize you were an adult? And tell us that transition of going from high school to college to adulthood.
A good question. So I realized I was an adult immediately. So I left college with a black plastic bag with 2 shirts, 2 pair of jeans, and I think a pair of shoes in it. And if it wasn't for and $30 in my pocket, and if it wasn't for a mentor giving me some cash, that's all I had going down. No bed sheets, no toiletries, nothing. And so as an adult, what you realize is you have to make it happen or it's not. Now, I graduated the salutatorian, and all the schools I had an offer to, I had full academic and full football scholarships. But scholarships don't necessarily give you extra money. So while I was training for football, I was also working during the summers. So there was football season, and then there was work, then class, and then back to football where I wouldn't work again, and then I'd work as soon as football season was over. Now, painted in all this, I did have a son my senior year of high school. So the one thing teachers told me not to do, which was to have a kid before I graduated, I did. But fortunately, his mother and grandmother were supportive enough to still allow me the opportunity to go to college.
So the entire time you were in college, you were dealing with adult issues by having a child.
Yeah, absolutely. So while my peers were going to Miami and other places for spring break, I was coming back to Memphis to spend time with my son.
That is an adult thing to do. As you talk about, finishing up school, you made a transition in the midst of playing football at one college to the other. Give us a little bit of story of color behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my first college, I was supposed to go to Cornell, Ivy League school out of high school. I didn't even entertain any other choices. But when my son was born, I decided to go to a school that was a little bit driving distance, just in case there was an emergency or anything happened. I wanted to be able to hop in the car instead of trying to book a flight on short notice. And so I went down to my first school, and they were hailing me as the next Steve McNair. And it was based off one game that I played really good.
What school was
that? That was Jackson State. And so I had a really good game against South Panola High School. And so all the teams that seen the tape, they were like, oh, man, this guy's going to be good. But I learned how to play quarterback on YouTube. And so there was still some development things that I needed to do. And not leaving South Memphis, the neighborhood I grew up in, I thought Jackson, Mississippi was a major metropolitan city. And my goal was to get to a major city. So when I got there, Jackson was actually smaller than Memphis. And so I was playing there. I wanted to leave because things weren't working out for me. I still needed more development, but I thought so highly of myself that I thought I should also be playing as I developed. Well, I tried to leave before my second season started, and the coach was like, look, we can't win a championship without you. So I decided to stay. I never dressed a single game. All I did was practice, and we won the championship. There was a coach that recruited me to a small school, Division II school here locally in Tennessee, and he got the job at Morehouse College. I didn't know what a Morehouse College was, but what I knew for sure is that Morehouse was in Atlanta. And when he called me and told me he was interested in me joining the team, he told me he was in Atlanta. I said, it can be Morehouse, Corehouse. I'm going to Atlanta. And so I went to Atlanta, was able to get to Morehouse, understand the history of that institution, and use football as a way to power through an education. And Morehouse in itself was an eye-opening experience.
How? Give me an example.
prior to Morehouse, I thought black people were a monolith. Thought we were all the same, extremely similar in nature. Well, you knock into Morehouse and you got your rich black kids, you got your preppy black kids, you got your skaters, you got your LGBT, you have your athletes. Emotion, they call them emo people, super smart guys, future politicians, future doctors. And all of this was on display. And I got to see the amazing, amazing diversity of black men and black women, because Spelman was across the street and Clark Atlanta was in the same community of schools that we call it the AUC. And I got to see the amazing diversity of black people by attending Morehouse in the AUC.
Wow. Tell us about your career. So you I'm assuming you came back to Memphis, or did you right out of school? What did you do, and how did you get to VP of Community Development and Regions?
Finesse. So by the time my freshman year of college had started, I decided that I wanted to have a career in money. I didn't have any growing up, and so I wanted to understand it. I wanted to understand how it worked in order to teach other people how money works so they don't have to be poor. And so at Jackson State, I was an international finance major. I was like, yeah, I'm going to do money and understand and do something with money all over the world. Who knows what it's going to be? I'll figure it out. When I transferred to Morehouse, they didn't have a international business, international finance degree. So I just stuck with finance. And one of the things I understood about business is that business has its own dress code, its own attire. And so I didn't have any money for that. So it took me maybe 3 months. I went by Brooks Brothers, which is one of the premier business clothers in the world, and hustled up on a job at Brooks Brothers so that then I could purchase business attire at a discount. And while I was there, I also learned business etiquettes. They had books on business, how to be a gentleman in business. And so by reading these books and practicing some of the things that in slow times in the store, I was reading those books and implementing those things in my life. And so,
so wait a minute now. Let's jump a little bit further.
Okay.
So what made you come back to Memphis, and where did you go? And was it always in banking and money? And
Sure. So I bring up the Brooks Brothers because I overheard some guys talking about this financial company that they were working for. So I questioned them, and they mentioned Northwestern Mutual. The next day, I looked on the internet, got a phone number, and called the Northwestern Mutual up and asked for an internship. They asked me when I can come in. It was 9 o'clock that day. I said I could be there at 10:30. So I started my internship at Northwestern Mutual while I was at Morehouse. And once I finished, I went on to be a full-time financial advisor there. So I had my Series 7 and 66. And so I came out doing financial planning, life insurance, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. That is a 100% commission job. And you have to kind of have relationships with people or have just a great hustle. Well, I did that for 4 years, and my expenses grew faster than my revenue. So honestly, I burnt out of the business. I floated around and worked at a couple of telecom companies, one in Atlanta. Then I sold cell phones at AT&T. That was my move to get back to Memphis. I said, look, I'm not where I wanted to be in Atlanta. I have a son in Memphis. It's time to go back instead of having fun where I am. Mm-hmm. So I took any job. I got a job selling cell phones at AT&T. I did well. I was working too much, but really needed to spend more time with my son. So I took a job working from home at this wholesale distribution company selling manufacturing supplies. Working from home, I used that time to do a lot of volunteer work in the community, build relationships, but I was bored with that job. And so everybody I met, I say, hey, I want to get into banking. This is what I want to do. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying I want to be in banking, I sat down and said, okay, what do I want to do on a day-to-day basis as a professional? And so I wanted to meet and work with smart people who are high achievers. I wanted to travel. I wanted to be able to entertain, and that led me into banking. And so I told everybody I met, And at one nonprofit meeting, the guy said, you should go to this meeting. I went, introduced myself to all the executives. And about a year later, I had a job at a bank.
Banking.
With no banking experience.
That's awesome. And you moved on to eventually be community development for regions. Any regrets? Any regrets?
Oh, that's a good question. I think early on I would work a lot harder than I was. The world belongs and things belong to people who work hard. And I was enjoying life and working hard. And balance is overrated early. Right? You have to put your full force into working hard early, and then you can enjoy it after 4 or 5 years of really hard work. So I'd work a lot harder early in my career.
If you could talk to that kid back in, let's say, Carver High School today, you're talking to him, what would you say to him?
I'd say make as many friends as you can. Like, everybody's great. And you never know who you'll connect with later. So treat everybody right. Be friends with as many people as you can. Know what you want to do and just work extremely hard to accomplish it. Just stay focused. That's what I tell them.
Mr. Williams Brack, we are coming to the end of this interview.
Yeah.
But men, young men and boys are watching you right now, viewing, listening to you. You got a chance to say something directly to them.
Yeah.
What would you say?
I'd say figure out what it is that you want. Aimlessness is a vice. Always put something in the GPS and work your butt off to go get it. Whatever it is that you want in life, you can have it. You just have to work hard to get there. That's it.
Words of wisdom from Mr. Williams Brack. Williams, thank you for sharing your journey on The Journey. And listen, we're going to keep bringing them to you. We're going to keep on every episode. So stay right here. Stay locked in on The Journey on the KUDZUKIAN Network. I'm your host, Larry Robinson. Till next time, keep your eye on the prize.
The Journey hosted by Larry Robinson. Executive producer, the Delta Boulay.